Hello everyone, my name is Alex Patterson, and you probably have seen me as this guy, but most people know me as CodingCatDev. In this talk, we're going to break down why Firebase and Next.js are a perfect match. They're made for each other. So strap on that seatbelt, we're going to go through all of Next.js and Firebase in less than 20 minutes. Let's get started. Okay, so the first thing that we should probably do is check out the app that we're going to write. In this application, it's running off Next.js, and right now we're just at the index page, so we see some kind of information about the application. The second page I want to show you is a client-side page. In this client-side page, we're just fetching data about our cats. Now currently, I don't have a way to actually add any cats, so I need to sign in. And now I have the ability to add cats to the application. So the first cat's name, I'm going to name this because ones are coming up first. I'll just do one crazy cat. House cat, sure. Right now that's just a free text field. I'm going to change this to have a bunch of colors that come up first. So I'm going to submit that, and you'll see there, this crazy cat one just came up. Now the thing with this is that currently, this crazy cat has this many colors, but in reality, someone probably mistyped this. Unfortunately, right now, our static page has already been created. So you'll see this page switch from client side to static. I'll show you how we build this static page as well. So on this static page, when this loads up, it's already got default data that's coming from its initial props, giving all of these different colors. Now, if that is already loaded, what the cool thing about what I'm going to show you is we could automatically change this down to the two colors that it should be, and you should see it change magically just like that. So it's already listening. It used the initial data and then it's listening to the change and updated accordingly. Now let's say this static page was out there for like an hour for cache. Once that cache comes up, it'll stop doing this flick over to the correct colors, and it will actually get the right data from the server. So that's the advantage of going to the client side. The second piece that I want to show you is the ability to lock some features down on the server side. So if we change this static page over to a server page where we might update this cat, it actually bounces us out and says invalid user true. So maybe you would throw a pop-up or something else at that point. Now, instead of logging in as this Alex Patterson user, I'm going to sign in as a more admin role using my CodingCatDev user. So now that I'm logged in as CodingCat, I'll come to the cat still. I can see this crazy cat. Everything's functioning the same exact way. Now, instead of this static page, if we go to the server page, we're gonna get this great pop-up that says you have reached the super secret admin page that shows off all the cat's data. So I might put something better than this, and maybe where you can upload photos or anything you want as you're an admin. But I just wanted to show the fact that we can also handle server-side admin and authentication criteria based on tokens. The first thing I want to cover with Firebase is that there's three different areas that you can look at within Firebase: build, release and monitor, and engage. The key here is going to be build for us. We're going to focus in on Cloud Firestore, and then authentication. We're also going to consider cloud functions as we talk through our demonstration, but we won't implement those at this time. There's a lot of other features after that we can add in. One of them is Google Analytics that is very easy to use. And then after that, you can dive into more things like cloud messaging or remote config as your app grows. First item on our list is Firestore. Firestore is a NoSQL document database that lets you easily store, sync, and query data for your mobile and web apps at global scale. The difference between something like DynamoDB or MongoDB and Cloud Firestore is that document part. Documents are held within collections. So you can structure your data with every collection having documents within it, and each document can have a collection of its own. Here's an example. You'll notice in this example, we have posts as a collection, and a post document has this long ID. That post document also contains a history collection. Unlike something like Amazon's DynamoDB, which they place AppSync or API Gateway in front of, Firebase Cloud Firestore has its own set of rules. Here in these rules, you can see that we're preventing all access to the database from the top level. You can see here that there is an allow read and write if false, which means you're not able to access anything unless we allow it. This is the safest way to set up your database. In this example, we also set up an accounts collection that only allows read and write from an admin. You notice here that if false, that doesn't allow anyone else into that except for an admin API. However, here in the users section, you can see that if it belongs to your own user ID, it will allow you to read it. If you have a role of admin on users and then user ID, you're allowed to update or delete that record. Similarly, profiles is about the same thing, but a profile is something more public. So as long as you're signed in here as the is signed in check guarantees, you're then allowed to read that collection's data. The right side of this, you have to belong to that specific user in order to update that document. Okay, this is the part in the demonstration where I've probably been talking a little too long and not quite excited enough, but I don't want to chase our tail when we have to dive into the Firestore thing. We need to know about these documents and collections. So let's move on and we'll jump into the Next.js side of the house and then we'll see how it merges together. Inside of a Next.js project, you have a pages directory. Each JavaScript file defined, or in our case, TypeScript file, exports a React component that represents a route in the application. This means that the file structure that we have here mirrors the actual URL for the navigation in the application. Next can perform multiple server rendering strategies from a single project. We're going to talk about client-side rendering, static generation, and server-side rendering. Now for this example, there are some older versions of Firebase, but we've moved on to the more modular version 9 of Firebase for the client side. I do also want to call out this amazing package called React Fire. React Fire is hosted in the Firebase extended repo. Jeff and James are the main maintainers of this repository, and they work at Firebase, even though this isn't a Firebase-backed repo necessarily. They even took one of my updates as well. Jeff was kind enough to hook me up with this little guy too. So whenever you get a chance, make sure you add to open source projects. You never know what might happen. First things first, if we want to have a Firebase application, we have to put Firebase provider in. This is going to provide all of the configuration for our client-side application. The next thing we do is add our auth provider because the entire application will need auth at some point, so we might as well wrap it on the very top. The third thing is our Firestore provider. That's so we can access Firestore and it will initialize it. And then finally, our actual layout and components that go through. This is all done in a very special page called _app in Next.js. This runs for every single page that executes throughout the entire application. Let's take a look at these different wrappers because I put some additional code in here so that you don't have to do as much setup every time you create a new application. So there's a lot of things that we've imported both from Firestore, Firebase, Firebase Auth, and from React Fire. Now, as you can see here, we are using the version 9 and it is doing the modularized smaller pieces, so we don't have to pull in the entire application. The reason I write that the reason I put these all in wrappers is it kind of takes away from all of these different layers that are required. So if you don't want to put the Firebase auth, or let's say the Firebase Firestore more specifically on every single page, you could implement these within each page. So you could just add the wrapper there. You need to be a little bit careful about this because if you're initializing something like Firestore, you need to check and make sure that Firestore has already been used. There's a little bit of what I'll call a bug right now in the emulators for Firestore. So I also do a check in here so that we can initialize Firestore correctly when using emulators. Passing in the SDK for each of these is key, and then you can just provide the children for the wrapper as it goes through. So that's what it looks like for all of the setup for React Fire provided to the rest of your React application. First off, we'll start with our client-side page. You can see here it's the most simple page. All we're doing is returning a simple component. Now there is one added thing in here from Next.js. They provide a dynamic way of loading your components. So we can get this cat admin component once it's served. You don't have to load this all at the initial state. You can load it afterwards dynamically, which is a huge benefit when you're trying to work on load times going into your system. Now we'll go ahead and navigate into the cat admin page, or cat admin component here. You'll see there's a lot going on once we get into the cat admin. If you remember, our cat admin has a tabular view to it. So we actually are pulling in all of the data here on the client side using Firestore. The use Firestore is a React Fire term, providing us the Firestore reference to the instance of the Firestore application. Use user is also coming from React Fire, and that provides us with a user correctly. We then set up normal things in Firebase, like your cat reference here, which is referencing a collection. One thing that's a little bit more advanced on this example, but I like to use it, is a hook that I created based on some examples in React Fire's user discussion for pagination. This allows us to create a hook directly to the cats collection so that we can pull it in but still paginate every 10 pages when we need to. So the key to all of this, even though we're sending back just a normal React application and we're pulling in Firestore data, this is all happening on the client side. If I go back to this client side page, you'll notice there's no props that are given to this page. It loads all on the client. So on this page, we're going to take a look at a static page. In order to create static pages in Next.js, you use two different functions. Now this might seem a little confusing as we're looking at this because we're only in the single file. The cool thing about Next is it's going to separate logic here from the rest of the functions that grab the server-side requirements. So your getStaticPaths function is going to actually execute in a Node.js environment. And what this is going to do is it's going to reach out and get all of the cats that are required to build different pages from. So if I go ahead, I have Firebase set up as a admin feature here. So let's take a look at that really quickly, how that admin works. So in the utilities here, I've created this admin piece. The admin actually uses a service account key. So if you're using the admin SDK, you technically have access to your entire database. So you have to be really careful about using this. But the way that you can deploy out to different sites like Vercel, you'll store this service account key in different environment variables. So the environment variables that are set up here should all be protected. And you'll notice these environment variables differ from our front-end environment variables because they don't start with next underscore. Next underscore actually puts everything on the client side as well, whereas these only go to the server side. So they're well protected and they won't leak out into your application. One thing to note, even as I'm showing this off, I want to call out this environment.local file. I do not check in. It's in part of my git ignore, and it never gets checked in to any of my GitHub repos. That's what keeps me safe from showing too many keys out there. Now let me back up where we're using this Firebase admin. After we initialize the application for all of the different credentials, we can then use Firebase admin throughout the rest of our application. So if we take a look again at getStaticPaths, the first thing that we're going to do is get all of the cats that are required through here. So these cats are all of the cats in our entire collection, and we pass those back. So as we take those cats back, we're going to push every one of those paths in. So realistically, what we could have done on getCats is to pass back only at the ID. But this is left there in case you need additional data coming from the server. Now that may or may not be the best way to do it. You might want to change this out just to get IDs for your own type of implementation. So after we pass back all of these paths, that's going to create the different files. I'll show you in 1 second what I mean by that. When we pass those different IDs in, getStaticProps is going to then use those in each individual page. So in this page, we actually have a prop that comes in called cat. Called cat ID. So in the parameter, we have cat ID. We can now fetch on the server side only an individual cat object or document, as we remember from the Firestore example. So let's take a quick look at cat by ID. All we're doing here is taking our admin SDK, grabbing the document with that ID in the cat's collection. Now that we have all that data for the cat, we do have to do a couple things. Next.js won't allow you to send anything that has an object base. It has to be JSON serializable in order to pass it. Unfortunately, some of our date timestamps are not serializable because they're stored as an object. So instead, I take those to a date and then just do a date string and pass them up. Sometimes it might make more sense to do milliseconds or anything else that would make sense in your application. You just can't pass objects through, or deeply nested objects, I should say. Now that we have those props, we return props to the entire page, and that's where we get our cat data. So I'm going to run an example right here just so this all kind of clicks and makes sense together. And I'm going to run npm run build. So you'll notice here that it started creating static pages, and we have about 30 cats that are coming through. So it says generating static pages 4 of 30. And as it processed through there, it's doing this asynchronously. I put a console log at the very bottom of the page, and you should be able to see that right here. So here's static data, and I put that in there so that you could get a very good indication of what kind of data that we're passing through. So it says right here, static data, here's all of the different data from the cat. The ID, the name, all of the colors. So all of this data actually gets passed to each individual page. And as that page then gets generated, here's our different paths for each individual page. What we can take a look at up in our .next folder, because this is our build folder, we can take a look at the server pages that were created in the static folder. So let's take a look at just one of these. At the very bottom, you'll see the application JSON has all of our correct page props coming into it. So when this page is generated or statically generated, we will then have the data automatically. This also allows us to have great SEO coming in so that bots can go ahead and render a page on their own, and all the data's there. So we don't have to worry about it having to create a client-side rendered page. Okay, so now we have 2 of our page types done. Those are probably the most simple ones. We will dive back into the static one because I want to show you something really cool, but it will take an example to take a look at that. So for the last page type, it's our server page type. You'll notice in this page type, it's using the get server side props. This is very, very similar to our static page, which has get static props. However, in this case, we all already know, because we're in a page called server and cat ID is provided, we already have the cat ID that it's looking for. So when it goes down through here, it's going to go ahead and get the cat by ID just like we did before and pass it forward. Now, if you remember from our example though, we're actually trying to prevent users that are not authenticated or authorized. So the authentication piece is checked for any user here. And if that user goes through and validates as an admin, we let them in. Otherwise, we immediately pass back this valid user of false and throw that back. And that's how we landed on the front page as a not valid user. So here's our redirect to a false page. Now, similarly, if someone tries to go into server and pass a cat ID that they shouldn't be after, or it's missing is more correct, if that cat ID is not found, we pass back a not found of true, and that goes to a 404 page appropriately. If you want to continue building your knowledge, we have a lot of courses, even one on Next.js with Firebase and Tailwind out on the site. You can also check out our tutorials and blog posts that you might find helpful. The other thing that we do each week is a podcast, so make sure you subscribe to that podcast. Our podcasts come out in both video and audio formats, Make sure you subscribe with your favorite podcatcher today. I hope you enjoyed building a Next.js application with Firebase. If you have any questions or you just need something to figure out, go ahead and jump out to CodingCatDev on our community page, and you can jump right into our Discord and ask us anything you might need to know. Thanks so much, and we'll see you next time.